Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Reagan Jones. I am, as many of you may know, the founding editor and owner of Healthy Aperture and the co-founder of the Recipe Redux. And we have the distinct pleasure today of bringing to you with the National Honey Board the Honey's Natural Benefits webinar, and we also want to acknowledge Ketchum PR who helped to make this possible today. When we founded Healthy Aperture and Recipe Redux, one of our main goals was to be able to bring healthy food blogging to life, and no better opportunity do we have to do that than in the case of the webinar today. Many of you all have before you honey varietals that you're going to taste and experience. You're going to hear from not only a beekeeper and a honey packer, but an award-winning cookbook author. And hopefully what you'll take away from this is an appreciation of not only the wonderful taste that honey has to offer, but also the benefits as well. I want to thank each of you for participating, and I hope that you appreciate this benefit that we're bringing to our members and our bloggers today. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kim Essex, who's going to be your moderator for the day, and wish you all a very sweet and happy rest to your day.
Thank you, Reagan. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you all are. I'm Kim Essex. I lead the food practice for Ketchum's North American region. And for those of you who don't know Ketchum, I think probably the most important thing to know is that this firm has great heritage and passion in food. We've been working for 60-plus years as a PR agency with farmers and ranchers and food companies and registered dietitians. And one of the groups that we work with is the National Honey Board. So it really is our pleasure to help, my pleasure to help facilitate this discussion. As Reagan mentioned, we're going to be talking today to a beekeeper and a honey bottler, packer, and an award-winning cookbook author who many of you may know. And then we're going to do something really interesting, which is, first time we've tried this, which is go through a virtual tasting with you. So hopefully you all have your honeys ready and can experience this with us and talk with us about what we're tasting and experiencing. I will tell you there's a chat box here. So as you have questions, do type in your questions and we will gather those and do the best we can to answer them in this session or afterward, after we taste. We go through the tasting. Learning objectives for this session are listed here that include identifying at least 2 steps of honey harvesting, listing at least 3 applications of honey in cooking, recognizing 2 monosaccharides, I hope I said that right, present in honey, and receiving 1 continuing education credit. I'll make note about that, the continuing education credit. We will be sending a survey to the participants, all of you guys on the phone, after the call. Once you return that survey, the credit will be applied at the end of the month, or you'll receive that certificate after the survey is returned to us. So those are the housekeeping things. You'll probably notice your phone's on mute, so do use the chat box to correspond with the team, and you'll get information back from us as we go along here. The next step for me is to introduce our panel, which is a privilege. Gene Brandi is a beekeeper in California, and he's been beekeeping since the 1970s. He has 2,000 colonies. So Gene is going to talk to us about what it takes to take care of 2,000 colonies of bees. Gene is very involved in the honey beekeeping industry, and he's the VP, the Vice President of the American Beekeeping Federation right now, and he's also been part of the National Honey Board and on leadership there in the past too, so he very much knows the folks who work in this business, this industry. The next panelist is Brent Barkman. Brent is our honey packer bottler. He is also a beekeeper and has a very significant beekeeping operation. So he'll talk to us about how he came to beekeeping. It's a family business. The honey packing in business that he runs is one of the largest in the United States. And particularly intrigued to hear from Brent how he sources his honey and as it arrives to him, what he does next to get it to our homes around the country. And then finally, we talked about Marie Simmons. She is our cookbook author and honey aficionado. She is a teacher, an author, a honey lover, and she has written most recently a cookbook called Taste of Honey, the definitive guide to tasting and cooking with 40 different varietals. And it makes her a perfect person to really guide us, I think, in our virtual tasting today. I want to talk about the National Honey Board, and one of our panelists, Brent Barkman, is the chair of the National Honey Board this year. The Honey Board is an industry-funded agriculture promotion group that works to educate consumers about the benefits and uses for honey and honey products through research, marketing, and promotional programs. And here's the website. Just we'll reference this a few times, but for more information about the Honey Board, visit honey.com. And with that, I am going to introduce Gene on the phone. Gene, this is a picture of yourself and a few folks on your operation. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came to beekeeping and how your business works?
Sure, Kim. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here today and speak with all of you about bees and honey and how honey is made. Yes, that's a picture of me. I'm on the left, and one of my workers, Jordan Erickson, and my son, Michael, is on the right, leaning up against the fender of the truck there. And that's one of our trucks that we use to haul the bees around or to haul honey around or to do various things. I have a forklift on the back there that we use to move the bees around as well. I've been in the beekeeping business, as Kim mentioned, since the late 1970s, and it certainly is a passion of mine. I mean, we love our bees, and beekeeping involves basically a lot of different disciplines. I mean, we need to be entomologists, of course, but we're also botanists because we need to know and understand the plants that the bees work in order to gather nectar, gather pollen, and to do the things that they need to maintain their health. But certainly, beekeeping is a passion for me, and I'm very proud that my son has decided after he graduated from college here a few years ago to come into business with me. So it truly is a partnership. And my wife, Christine, of course, is also involved in the business as well. But we're very passionate about it, and we love our bees.
All right, Gene, let's start really with the beginning, which is how do bees make honey?
Well, it's a very, very interesting phenomenon, the way that they do that. And always remember that honey is a product of a plant. The bees will seek out nectar, which is a sugar water solution that's secreted from the base of the flowers on the plants that do secrete nectar. Now, some plants have flowers that secrete nectar, some that will produce pollen. Some flowers will produce both pollen and nectar, but it is the nectar and not the pollen that is the source of honey. And so bees will go out to flowers that have nectar in them, and they will extend their tongue. It's actually a three-part structure that when they extend it, it forms a tube like a drinking straw, and they will suck up the nectar from the base of the flowers, and they will store it in what's called their honey sac. It's actually like a storage tank. It is not, I repeat, it is not their digestive stomach. It is a storage tank that they use for hauling the nectar back to the colony. So when the field bee that's collected this nectar returns back to the colony with this load of nectar, the little pump in the bee's head is reversed and the honey sac is emptied. A little drop of nectar appears near the mouth parts of the bee, and a hive bee, whose job it is to collect that nectar from the foraging bee, will take that nectar with its little drinking straw, store it in its honey sac, and take it to the proper place in the colony and distribute that nectar and deposit it in the honeycomb, where it can then be dried, because nectar can have as much as 85 or 90% water in it, and it needs to be dehydrated down to less than 18.6% water before it's truly honey. So the bees will gather nectar, store it, and dehydrate it. And in the process, when it is in the honey sacs of the bees, they do add some enzymes that will help invert some of the sugars in the nectar to the two simple sugars, fructose and glucose. And fructose and glucose are the two main sugars of honey. There are other sugars in very minor amounts, but fructose and glucose are the two main sugars. So the honey itself is truly a product of the plant, as I mentioned, and there are over 300 different varieties of honey that can be made by bees in the USA. And by the way, you can go to honeylocator.com, which is a honey board website, to locate various varieties of honey that are available, that are produced in the USA. But certainly, it's a lot like wine, where wine is a product of a particular grape. And even a particular grape that's grown in a different type of soil may produce some different nuances and different flavors and whatnot. The same thing with honey. The flavor, the color, the aroma, the antioxidants, the mineral content, or whatever is in that honey is truly a product of that flower. And it's a product of that flower from that plant grown in a particular soil. So there's a lot of unique characteristics to individual honeys that will not be found in other sweeteners whatsoever. So it's certainly there are a lot of different varieties, but the most common in the U.S. would be like clover honey. Clover honey is a very commonly made honey in the upper Midwest. It's a very fine honey. It's a very light-colored honey, very mild flavored, uniquely flavored. Orange blossom is also a very popular honey with that fruity orange blossom aroma. And those are a couple of the lighter honeys. Then there are honeys that are more bold in flavor and certainly much darker in color, like avocado and buckwheat. And I believe you're going to be tasting those today. But certainly the constituents of the honey and everything about the flavor and the color of the honey is all a product of the flower.
Right. So honey, product of the flower, particularly the nectar of the flower, and fascinatingly 300 different varietals, because lots of plants with lots of different types of nectar produce a very varied type of honey. So that's kind of what I'm taking from this. So the bees, Gene, the bees have collected the nectar now. So what do they do next, and what do you do next as a beekeeper?
Well, as a beekeeper, during honey production season, which is just during certain parts of the year. I mean, during much of the year, the bees are not making honey at all. But during the honey collection season, we want to add more boxes. We call them honey supers, but we add more boxes to the hive to give them more room to store this excess honey that we hope that they produce. So when it comes time to harvest that, when they've produced honey and we have surplus honey in the boxes. And by the way, let me just state that we never take all the honey away from the bees, because the bees need some of this honey for their own sustenance. So we only take the surplus, okay? And but when it is time to remove that, we evacuate the bees out of the individual honey supers, so we leave them with their colony. We don't take the bees home. We just want to take boxes of honey home. So once we do that, we put the boxes or supers on pallets, and we'll truck them back to our warehouse, where we put the supers in a warm room. And because honey needs to be warm for it to flow and to be extracted from the honeycomb. So we've got the honey in the warehouse, and then what we need to do before we actually spin the honey out by centrifugal force is we need to take off the caps. The slide that's showing right now shows a hand knife. We use a machine to do it. We don't use a hand knife, but certainly that is one way of doing it. But the wax caps that the bees have used to seal over the cells that are full of honey need to be removed in order for the honey to be spun out in the centrifuge. The picture on the right is a picture of some of the frames with honey in a centrifuge that will spin at about 300 to 350 revolutions per minute. And the centrifugal force will draw the honey from the comb. It'll hit the side of the tank and flow to the bottom. Once the honey is taken from the combs and it flows to the bottom of the tank, we then pump our honey into some old stainless steel milk tanks, is what they are actually, and we let the honey settle in there, and after a couple of days, any major particles, which are basically pieces of wax, such as the wax that's being uncapped from the frame right now, there's particles of that remain in the frame. They'll float to the top. The honey is so heavy and dense it sinks to the bottom of the tank, and we fill generally 55-gallon barrels. And once that the honey is in the barrel, we wait till we get enough barrels, and we ship our honey off in bulk to people like Brent in order for him to do with it what he does with it.
All right, and so nothing added. This is just a process of collecting the honey from these frames.
Absolutely. No, we don't do anything at all to it. I mean, whatever is in the honey, as I described earlier, is a product of the flower, and all we do in our process, in our warehouse, is remove that honey from the comb. We don't change it physically in any way, don't add anything to it, or it's the way the bees made it.
Right. And I know you are a student of bees, so they're not only part of your livelihood, but also a part of the ecosystem. They play a vital role in the environment, and I find this fascinating, the discussion about the role of bees in the environment. Can you tell us about that, Gene?
Well, certainly bees are important pollinators of many, many plants. I mean, a lot of native plants, backyard plants, people that have backyard gardens certainly benefit from bee pollination, and of course American agriculture benefits from bee pollination as well, and that's what we do with our bees for part of the year, is we pollinate crops, and about 1/3 of our diet just wouldn't be here without the pollinating activity of bees, and certainly it's the most interesting part of our diet, the fruits and vegetables. Almonds, of course. Almonds is the largest bee-pollinated crop in the country, actually, in the world for that matter. But I heard someone say recently that, and I think it's very apropos, that we could survive, we could have food without the pollinating activity of bees, but we might all get scurvy because we don't have enough vitamin C or other things in our diet that would really help us to maintain a healthy, varied diet and to have all the vitamins and minerals that we truly need.
All right, so Gene, you have put your honey into barrels, and this is where Brent, you step into the equation, so I'm going to introduce you and ask you just to tell us about how you came to the honey business.
Well, thank you, Kim, and as well, it's a pleasure to be with you folks today, and it's interesting to see how many people are interested in the product that folks like Gene and myself as beekeepers are very passionate about. We've done this talk a couple of times, and part of me is a little bit of jealous about Gene gets to talk about the bees, which are really our passion. I've spent a lifetime in the beekeeping and honey packaging industry. I'm a third-generation beekeeper as well as a honey packer. My family has been doing this since the early 50s, and I've grown up in it. I'm the owner of a honey company in South Dakota that runs a significant amount of bees, and it's called Artesian Honey Producers. We raise the honey and have the bees as well. I'm also the owner of Barkman Honey LLC, which is located in Hillsborough, Kansas. It's one of the largest bottling companies in the United States, and we package for a lot of retail honey that you see on the shelves in supermarkets. And along with that, I'm also the chairman of the National Honey Board. So I'm involved with a lot of different aspects of the honey industry. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about what happens to the honey after it's produced, and how we take care of it and provide a great product to consumers through the store shelf.
Right, and so you buy from beekeepers like Gene all over the country, all over the world.
Yes, we do. We actually import some honey from overseas. Our consuming public in the United States consumes around 400 million pounds of honey a year, and our producers in the United States only can raise about 160 to 180 million pounds. So we're a net importer of honey. So some of the honey that we consume in the United States has to come from overseas. And so we purchase honey. It comes in 55-gallon drums, as Gene was talking about. We bring it into our facility, and one of the first things that we do with the honey is we test it. Everything that comes into our facility is tested for many different things. The color of the honey, we really don't test for the floral source, but we do test for the color, which tells us a lot of times what the floral sources are. We test for lots of different things, the moisture of the honey, as Gene was talking about. And that helps us to do some blending at our facility here to make sure that we have a consistent product to provide to the consumers. Once we get the honey in and we've tested it and making sure that the quality is good and everything is safe, first thing we do is we warm the honey. We have to warm it because most of the time when it comes in, it's already crystallized in the barrel. Honey naturally crystallizes and turns to a solid, and that's one of the things that we do here in our facility is make sure that we stabilize that honey so that it stays liquid on the store shelves. And so we warm the honey. First thing we do is we warm the honey. Then we send it through a filtering system. The warming the honey helps it flow. Honey is very thick, as you know, when it's on your shelf at home. And so we warm it up and we send it through a filtering system that takes out all of the particles that shouldn't be in honey. Some particles that are collected in the extracting process. There's sometimes some wax particles. There's air bubbles. There's different things in honey that shouldn't be there. The U.S. Grade A standards for honey say that it should be free of any particles and air bubbles. And so that's one of the things that filtering does for it.
Right, and so help me picture those filters, Brent. Since we're virtual, give me a picture of that verbally.
Well, the filters are made up of a series of papers that are in an accordion shape, and the honey is sent through those papers, and it takes out all of the foreign particles and air bubbles, and actually it takes out the pollen, which is not a constituent of honey at all. And pollen is an extra in honey that causes honey sometimes to crystallize prematurely, because crystals form around particles in the honey. And so we take out the pollen particles. Once and that accordion filter, the honey is all pumped through there, and it helps clean it up and make it a very nice, clear, golden product, which a study by the National Honey Board in 2012 showed that the consuming public likes a clear, golden product that's free of impurities and particles and doesn't crystallize quickly. And that's one of the things that filtering helps to stabilize the honey for and lengthens the shelf life and keeps it from crystallizing. A lot of people get frustrated because honey crystallizes in their cabinets, and the honey is not spoiled at that point, but it is a little bit less convenient to use when it's crystallized.
And some folks on the phone may have heard the phrase ultrafiltration. So, Brent, explain to us the difference between what you're doing here and ultrafiltration. Very different,
right?
Yeah?
Right. It's very different. The filtration that we're doing is not adding or taking anything that makes up the honey away. We're actually just taking out some things that are undesirable in the honey. And when we warm and filter the honey, it doesn't result in the destruction of vitamins or minerals or antioxidants or anything like that that Gene was mentioning. We found that out. The National Honey Board did a study again in 2012 that proved that that those valuable things in honey are still in there even after it's been filtered. The ultrafiltration process that you've heard about and sometimes is confused with what we're doing is a process where water is added to the honey, actually adulterating the honey and changing the composition of honey completely. And then it's put through some very, very fine filters that actually take out everything that's in the honey that even makes it honey. And so the resulting product that comes out of the ultrafiltration process it really is not honey anymore. And USDA has confirmed that, and FDA has confirmed that ultrafiltered honey is no longer honey.
And we talked about the testing. That's one of the first things you do to make sure that it meets your standards as a bottler and packer, and both so you can blend the honeys too, because it's kind of a taste role here. It's like wine.
It is, and when we bring the honey in to our facility, as I said, we test it all, and we actually have a sensory panel in our facility that tastes all of the honey that comes in, and we use that sensory tasting to make blends of honey that are compatible to what the consumer likes. We're very careful about keeping a consistent and very nice flavored honey on the consumer store shelf that people will enjoy from one time to the next and not notice a lot of difference. We don't pack a lot of varietal honeys. We mix the varieties together, and therefore we don't actually call it a specific variety in most cases. We do package a clover honey, which is a predominantly clover flavor, and so it's one of the only varietals that we'll call out on our labels.
Okay, all right. And then the last step, bottling.
Yes, once we've heated, warmed the honey and filtered it, we send it to the bottling room, and it's a very it's pretty much a simple process that the honey goes through. It's just cleaned and put into bottles, and we don't add anything to it. We don't take anything away except for the undesirable things. And once we put it into the bottle, we label it and code it, and box it up for outbound shipment. And it's really a pretty elegant, simple craft that we do. And but we're providing a service that consumers in the United States have come to expect, where they like to have that clear golden product that you see on the store shelves. And we're proud of the fact that we're providing a very nice product for the consumer, that they'll get the same thing from time to time, and that they buy it, and we really enjoy what we're doing with it.
And then does honey expire? Do you put an expiration date on the bottle? How does that work?
Well, honey doesn't expire. Honey will never spoil. It'll crystallize. One of the things that we do is through the filtering and the warming process, we stabilize the honey for a longer shelf life than normal. And we guarantee, once it leaves our facility here, we guarantee that it'll stay liquid on the store shelf for 2 years. And that's what consumers in the United States have come to expect and enjoy. We put a best buy date on it 2 years out, but that best buy date really just is a way of tracking to make sure that it stays liquid to that point. It can be used as long as the honey's in the bottle. It's never going to spoil.
Amazing. Thanks, Brent. I think next up is Miss Marie Simmons. Marie, tell us about yourself and the inspiration behind this cookbook we see on the screen.
Well, hi there, Kim, and it's a pleasure to be with you and with all of our attendees. It's very exciting to share all this information about honey. I've heard Brent and Gene several times talk about honey, and each time I'm fascinated, which is part of what happened when I started working on this book. To back up a little bit, I have always loved honey, even as a child. We always had honey at home. We had favorite family dishes we prepared with honey, especially something called a honey cake, which is not a cake, but it was just a fried Southern Italian delicacy where you fried dough and then you made these wonderful puffy little rosettes, my grandmother called them, and we dipped them in honey, and we always had them for holidays. And now, several generations later, we still enjoy them during the Christmas holidays. But anyway, so that was, we always had honey at home, and it was always just honey. I mean, it was a wonderful golden color. It came from the local farms. We lived I grew up in the Hudson Valley area of New York State, so there was many farms around, and there weren't farmers markets. There were farm stands. I'm sure some of you can identify with that description. But anyway, there was the honey, always on the table to drizzle on toast. My memory of honey is really its combination with butter. So I love the taste of butter and honey together. It's the perfect marriage of fat and a little salt, if you have a salted butter, and the honey. So honey is, though, more than just something you stir into your tea or you have on your, drizzle on your waffles or pancakes or on your toast. I came to honey actually as a cook because an editor suggested the idea to me. She had been at her market, farmer's market, and in the Midwest. I think she lives in Kansas, and she saw these varieties of honey, and she didn't know what to do with them. And so she called me and said, we need a book about describing these tastes of all these different honeys and how you use them in cooking. What do I do with these different jars of, buckwheat or alfalfa or wildflower? How do I use them? And they're all different colors. And so that started my journey into doing more culinary applications of honey, other than what I knew and loved, which was in baking and in sweets. What I did was...
I'm sorry, Marie. I was going to actually ask you, because you're getting to this great culinary moment of it provides great sweetness, but there's so much other things that honey brings to food, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about that if you could.
Yes, it has a multitude of functional benefits, as you see on your slide. It locks in flavor, locks in moisture, helps resist spoilage, as Brent mentioned, and I think Gene, it never spoils. It's always, there are examples of honey that are found in Egyptian tombs, and they're not spoiled. It works as an emulsifier for sauces and for dressings. It is an excellent, provides balance to dishes, which is where I got very excited because I went from baking to savory dishes. And you'll see some of the savory dishes there. On the left is the previous slide is actually a flatbread with cheese and honey. It's one of my passions. And then there's the eggplant with feta cheese and honey drizzled on it, and some fresh herbs. And that's it's very unusual, inspired by a Middle Eastern recipe where they use honey with eggplant and honey in their savory dishes very often. And I just use that as a jumping off point for this particular recipe. And also I used it with squash. I use it as a marinade for chicken, for fish. It gives a wonderful glow and a sheen to ribs, to chicken, broiled chicken or roasted chicken. And there's a picture there of honey being used in a mashed squash dish. I think it's squash and apples, actually, and which is really fun and delicious. And then, of course, the different varieties of honey, which a different flavor profile, which we will experience in a minute or so when we do our tasting, adds another dimension of flavor, another flavor note. So it's not just sweetness, it's more than that, it's more complex. It provides balance in sweet, sour, bitter, and salty dishes, which I adore. I always put a spoonful in a stir fry that has maybe the heat of ginger and some hot red pepper, and it just brings it all together and adds that flavor. I love it in dressing with lemon juice or vinegar, and a wonderful non-fat dressing is equal parts lemon juice and honey. I usually start with, depending on the size of the salad, 3 tablespoons of each, and you have this really wonderful balance of flavors. And that's one of my favorite quick and easy dressings to make.
Which brings up a question, because I must admit I'm a bit intimidated. With dressings you can kind of taste it, but with baking, the substitution, how do we do that right?
Well, in baking, it's because honey is a liquid. You should reduce any of the liquid ingredient that is already in the recipe by at least a 1/4 cup, and then you use your measurement of honey. Then you add a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda to help balance the acid and alkaline components of your baking recipe. So that works very, very well. And reduce your oven temperature, because honey will brown very quickly. So if you reduce the oven temperature by about 25 degrees Fahrenheit, that will have your baked goods a perfect golden color without getting too brown. And there's all kinds of other little hints for baking with honey to have the honey at room temperature, make sure it's not too cold, or if it needs to be thinned a little, if it's very thick, because I think Gene mentioned the density of honey, it'll fall to the bottom. Well, that'll happen in the batter. So you'll have this dark layer, if you've ever had this dark layer in the bottom of your honey, pound cake or honey quick bread. It's because the honey wasn't mixed into the batter thoroughly. And you can do that by just warming it. And the way you warm honey is the same way you reverse the crystallization. You take your jar of honey, or you just spoon it out into a separate container, heat resistant. I like to use metal bowls because they heat very quickly and cool very quickly. But anyway, you fill another bowl with some boiling water or very, very hot water, and you let the honey rest in there, and it'll soften up and it'll mix more easily with your batters. But those are some of the quickly. Those are some of the ways to bake successfully with honey. And we'll get into a few more of those hints when we do the tasting. Honey has an extended shelf life, as we've mentioned. It'll never spoil. It might crystallize, but it doesn't mean it's spoiled. I love crystallized honey just spread on warm toast, because the minute it hits the heat, it starts melting, and it's delicious. I've actually used it as a filling for omelet. Mixing it with a little cheese and then putting it just before I fold the omelet over. You put your spoonful of crystallized honey in there. It just, melts just enough that you can get it on your plate without having it caramelize in the pan. It's antimicrobial, which helps to resist spoilage, and of course, as we mentioned, extends the shelf life. Keep honey at room temperature, which is what I do. I have a cabinet filled with honey. I also have a library in my garage of about 100 jars of honey. Many of them finally crystallized because they've been there more than 2 years, and I can't bear to get rid of them. I just slowly work my way through them. Honey is just a delightful subject, from the honeybee to the kitchen. You just can't miss. Honeylocator.com will tell us where to find these honeys, give us a little background about the honeys, and also honey.com is a great website, and one that I find myself referring to very often. Recipe ideas, information about other uses for honey, and about the differences in taste, which is so fascinating to me, and suggestions for using it in recipes.
Now, I know your honey library is loaded with honey. How do you know you're getting honey when you buy honey?
Well, look at the ingredient list, and it should say honey. That's the only thing it should say. And it's required that that be listed. And it is purely natural. And with, I think we all, we're looking for more, hearth and home, farmers market, natural. Of course, you can buy these in the supermarket, excellent quality honeys. And so honey is a really fun ingredient and one to feel good about. Pure. It's pure.
And it's a source of carbohydrates. So for nutritionally, this is what honey does.
Yes, it is. It has 17 grams of carbs and 64 calories, and it's composed of fructose and glucose. And I think that we talked about the crystallization, how it's if it's a higher, I believe it's the glucose is higher, it will actually crystallize. Gene or Brent can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm quite sure that's correct. And it has traces amounts of antioxidants, enzymes, minerals, vitamins, amino acids. It's just a smart, natural, energy-filled food. Putting a spoonful of honey in your water after a vigorous workout is a great way to, rehydrate yourself plus give yourself, the carbs that you need for energy. So there's many uses. You can fuss with it in the kitchen and bake, or you can just put it in your water bottle, and after that hard bike ride or your game of volleyball or whatever you're playing, soccer, you can give yourself a little boost. So are we ready to taste honey?
Yeah, let's taste some honey. We have 4, and we've sent those to all the participants, so this should be fun. I think this is where we're starting, Marie, with alfalfa. Tell us about alfalfa honey.
Yeah, and tasting honey is, it's a little bit like tasting wine. I like to start with the lightest colors. Light color doesn't always mean that it's going to be a very mild floral honey. Sometimes it has little spice notes in it. But it's a good place to start, especially as we work our way through these 4 honeys and we get to the final one, which is a very, very dark buckwheat. And we, knocks our socks off because it's a really, really strong flavor. But the way to taste honey is to observe the color. You might tilt the cup a little and look at the viscosity, the thickness of it. You might, and then you might smell it. Sometimes you can get an aroma. You don't always get a strong, identical floral source. I have never tasted or smelled an alfalfa blossom, but I have a feeling that if I sniff the alfalfa honey, it's not going to smell like the blossom, and it's probably not going to taste exactly like perhaps the blossom would taste. But it does give certain properties and certain flavor notes to the honey. So we've looked at the color, the texture, and when we taste that, we can do that right now if we haven't been doing it already. It's moderately sweet, but it has some very distinctive notes that I would call spicy. And this kind of honey I would use, first of all, it's popular everyday use. It's usually quite reasonable in price. So it has a wonderful neutral flavor for baked goods. I like it drizzled on dairy foods like yogurt, ice cream. It's good on cottage cheese. It's good with a mild goat cheese. And I really love that. That's a wonderful fast snack is a cracker with a smear of goat cheese on it and a little tiny drizzle of honey. And if you're using alfalfa honey, you'd be very happy with this flavor. But it works very nicely for marinades for fish or chicken.
Lovely. And then the next one that you all should have is Tupelo.
Now, Tupelo is quite extraordinary, and it's more of a delicacy. It has a very short period of harvesting, usually in the early summer when these beautiful, rich, flavored, smelling, spiky blossoms from the Tupelo tree. Now, it inspired Van Morrison's lyrics. She's as sweet as Tupelo honey, just like honey from a bee. So the Tupelo trees grow in the southern wetlands, in probably southern Georgia, northern Florida, It's quite unique in that it's a labor of love because the hives sit on stilts, and the beekeepers take their harvest by visiting the beehives in boats. So it's dear in price very often, but it's worth it if you're a honey aficionado. Excuse me for butchering that word, aficionado. It's a real treat. And once again, it's golden to light in color. It's sometimes opaque. It has a very runny texture. It has a very buttery taste, bright, clean, with a sweet finish. And that's why I like it on toast and butter. It also pairs well with cheeses, especially salty cheeses. Salty cheese will help offset that super sweetness of honey. And I use a lot of honey with cheese. And it pairs well with ice cream, hot cereal, cornbread, which would be very typical of the South, and of course pudding. And that's one of my favorites when I can get it.
Yeah, and then contrast that with avocado.
Well, when we get to the avocado, immediately our eyes can see the difference. The avocado is dark brown, although won't be quite as dark as the next one, but it's fairly rich in brown. And it comes from California and Florida, where the honeybees are very important pollinators. As they gather the nectar, the pollen gets on their little wings, and they get from blossom to blossom, tree to tree, they pollinate the tree blossoms. And it's a dark amber color. It's what we call amber. Very rich. Has a very distinctive aroma if you smell it compared to the other two. I find the flavors deep caramel and almost chocolatey, which is why I got the idea. I mean, I've been cooking and writing cookbooks for years, and you think you've seen it all and done it all, but you never have, not when it comes to food. Well, perhaps not when it comes to anything, but in my case, when it comes to food, I immediately thought of chocolate, and I thought, why not pair it with chocolate? So you'll see, in the photo, you might see it with a chocolate pudding. Try tasting it with a little square of nice semi-sweet chocolate, good quality semi-sweet chocolate, and you'll be amazed at the taste. I use it in chocolate pudding, in brownies, you will be very, very happy with it.
And then buckwheat is the last one, yeah?
Yeah, last but not least, Kim, we have buckwheat. Buckwheat is very unique in that it's very, very dark, and it has a robust, assertive flavor. But some call it memorable, not in a positive way. But I call it memorable in a positive way because I love the way it makes my barbecue sauce taste. I love what it does. I even like it actually in baked goods, in ginger cakes, spice cakes. Anything that has lots of flavor, the buckwheat will only complement it. Buckwheat is, the plants bloom all summer into late fall. They have profuse white flower clusters, and it's not a grain, although it's called buckwheat. Most of you, I'm sure all of you already know that, but it's a fruit seed, and we also know it as kasha. And the color of honey may vary by region to region, but I've never seen a light-colored buckwheat honey. I've only been exposed to the darker ones. Has a very malty taste and a lingering aftertaste.
Okay, and sort of molasses-like.
It is. That's a great. Actually, the words that we use to describe honey are not unlike the words that are used to describe wine. You put it on your tongue and you think, what does it remind me of? And sometimes it doesn't remind you of anything immediately. The main honey that comes to mind that immediately reminds me of the source of it is blackberry honey. That's one of the few honeys. It's mostly in the Northwest. And it just tastes like you have a mouthful of berries. But I have not seen that, and I've tasted well over 100, probably close to 200 honeys. Not that I can pull out of the top of my head what each and every one of them tasted like, but I do have a fairly well-exercised taste memory. And there's no end to what you can do with honey. and in culinary uses.
You know, we're going to grab some, we've been getting questions along the way, guys, but one question for sure that we have not talked about is pollen. And want to make sure that we talk about the role of pollen in the bee's life and also the role of pollen in honey. So, Gene, you want to take the first part of that and Brent maybe take the second part?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Yeah, the bees collect pollen as their source of protein. You know, they collect nectar to make honey as their carbohydrate source, but they also need protein, just like we do. And so pollen provides that for them, but it is, indeed, it's a separate and distinct entity from the nectar that's used to produce honey.
And then, Brent, pollen in honey. Do we need pollen in honey to make it honey?
No, we don't actually need honey, pollen in honey. In fact, the USDA Grade A standards require the removal of pollen from honey to be able to call it U.S. Grade A honey. It says you have to remove all air bubbles, particles, and foreign particles and pollen from the honey. So pollen is not a part of honey. That we want to make very, very clear. It's actually collected by the bees separately from the honey, and it never really gets mixed into the honey except in the beehive when it's being fed to the young bees.
The baby bees. So we have a question here. Oh, I'm sorry.
You know,
we have a question.
Kim,
Gene,
this is Gene. If I could just add one more little thing to what Brent said. It is sometimes inadvertently added to honey during the extraction process, and that's something that we do as beekeepers. Sometimes there may be a few cells of pollen in the honeycomb, and then it's inadvertently added to the honey, but it's not something that needs to be there or has to be there.
Right, and the bees don't intend it to be there. They're collecting the nectar, and that's what they make the honey from. So somebody asked a question. This is interesting, Gene. How does a honeybee determine which plants have nectar versus pollen?
Well, certainly the bees are looking for both. They're looking for both nectar and pollen, and if they find one or the other, they're going to collect them both. I mean, an individual bee is generally either a pollen collector or a nectar collector, but that doesn't mean that other bees from the same colony might not collect. Let's say if the nectar collector goes out and finds nectar in this flower, well, then the pollen collectors may collect the pollen from the same flowers. So, but generally the tasks that the bees have in the field are separate and distinct.
And
Kim, this is Brent again. There's another study that was done that shows that there is not a significant amount of pollen in honey to make a difference. Even when it's raw, there's very, very small amount of pollen in honey, so it isn't a very large part of the makeup of honey of raw honey at all.
Yeah, somebody had asked about allergies and the role of honey in protecting against allergies or allergic reactions, and that might be associated with the pollen. But I'd love to hear your all perspective on that topic.
Well, this is Gene, and I have people that come by my place frequently, and they want to buy local honey because they claim it's allergy season, and I never do claim that the honey is going to help them because I can't. But I tell them the honey's here. You're welcome to try it. If it helps your allergies, that's wonderful, but I can't claim that it will. And I don't know that there's any scientific studies that have ever shown that honey actually does help with allergies, but some folks believe it does, and that's fine.
Yeah, and the Honey Board is saying pollen present in honey is less than 1%, so that's a good fact to know. Gene, somebody had a question about how long does it take for a super to be filled with honey. So when the bees are going about their work and filling up the hives to feed the baby bees and then to feed themselves and also to feed these extra supers, how long does that take?
You know, it varies from crop to crop and from season to season. I mean, we've had some very, very good honey flows in my many years in the business where the bees could fill up a super, with nectar anyway, in just a few days, certainly less than a week. but it takes longer than that for them to dry it out and actually convert it to honey. And in that case, we'll stack up several supers on the colonies to give them plenty of room to store the nectar and that they can then dry. But as far as putting an empty super on with dry comb and having it sealed up with sealed honey, I'd say at the very minimum it might take a couple of weeks, the very minimum, but probably longer than that because the time it takes to evaporate all the water out. But certainly we've had flows like that. But in years like this in California, when we have a drought, we're happy to get anything that we can, and it might take them a month or even longer to get to even part of a super. So it all depends on the year, and certainly there are some crops like the citrus and the orange blossoms can have a very good honey flow for just a few days, and they'll pack it in as much as they can in let's say a week or 10 days, and then that's about the peak of it, and then they'll dry it out, and we've got a box of honey after that.
There's some curiosity.
Weather conditions are a big factor in that.
How fast
Absolutely, because the moisture in the honey is actually a function of the relative, it's a function of the moisture in the nectar to start with, but then the ability of the bees to dehydrate it and cure it down into honey depends a lot upon the relative humidity of the air in the area where the bees are. Because if it's a humid area, it takes the bees much longer to do that. But if it's a dry area like Arizona or say the Central Valley of California here, a lot of times we can get honey that's like 15% moisture or less, very easily because our humidity is so low.
There's we're coming on our hour, so I want to get in this question about the flower sources. Are bees exclusive to the flower? Do they cross-gather across different types of flowers? And are there nutritional differences from the type of nectar, the type of flower to the honey? That's a lot in one question, I know.
Wow. Well, certainly the bees will return to the same type of flower as long as they're getting a decent reward. If they're able to get a honey sack full of nectar by visiting just a few flowers, that's a pretty good nectar source, and they'll stick with that for as long as it's there. And then they may switch to something else, but generally they will stick with the same floral source until that floral source is diminished or exhausted.
And then Brent, a question for you about, lots of questions about raw. Is there an advantage to raw? What is raw honey? What is that?
Well, raw honey is just unfiltered honey, and it has everything that is from the production of honey, and it has the pollens. It has the once in a while there's some foreign particles or bee parts maybe even in the honey that could be in there. So raw honey is never filtered.
Okay. And so it crystallizes probably faster, but nutritionally not likely to be that different, or?
Right. The National Honey Board study showed that the vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants that were analyzed in the study were not affected by warming and filtering of honey.
Okay, thank you. We have definitely hit and extended our hour by a minute. I want to remind everybody of a couple website resources here listed on the screen, honey.com, where you can learn a lot about honey, how it's produced, recipes, and the story of honey is a great chance to kind of go on this journey again if you want to be reminded of the beekeeper's role, the honey bottler's role, and experience that. So those are two really good websites. Survey will be coming out to you, and once we get that, the continuing education credit will be assigned.
Kim, just one last thing. There was a question about colony collapse disorder and if eating honey was good to help that. And definitely eat more honey because the bees are relying on professional beekeepers to take care of them, and that's what their livelihood comes from, is the excess honey. And that the professional beekeepers are taking care of the bees in the best way they can, and that'll help with the colony collapse disorder. So eating honey is a great way to help the bees.
Great. Thanks, Brent. I think that's a great way to end. Thank you for flagging that. we appreciate all your time on the call today. I hope you learned something interesting about honey, both from a culinary perspective and how it's raised and bottled.